atheist many years ago. I believed that there was no God, but I couldn't prove that. So you can see it is actually a belief, not a fact. And that's, I think, a very important thing. But for many people, atheism is simply a different kind of religion. People worship certain people like Richard Dawkins or Christopher Hitchens. They regard their books as being holy books. They are infallible. And so they see these people as almost like prophets or gurus or something like that. So I think atheism has actually become a religion or even a belief system in its own right. Well, I think there are people who are really atheists. These are people who just don't believe there is a God and, in effect, just therefore do not want to have any particular belief systems. They're not actually believing something definite. They're simply saying we will live our lives as if there is no God, and that's all that there is to it. So very often atheism in modern America is not so much a belief that there is no God as a refusal to even engage with the question as to whether there is a God. In other words, it's simply living your life on the assumption that there is no God, but you haven't really thought about the God question. You're simply pragmatically saying, let's live life as if there's no God. Yes? All right, I look at the camera. Yeah, is that better? Do you want to do it again? So we start again. Would you like to start again? Let's start again. Okay, I look at the camera. It's nice looking at you, but I look at the camera. Right. I think atheism can become a belief system because atheists believe that there is no God, but they can't actually prove that. So it's a kind of faith in its own way. But of course, there could also be a kind of religion which has no hope. If there is no God, then there is no hope of eternity. There's nothing beyond what we see in the world. And for me, that really doesn't offer us hope. And we need hope if we're going to lead meaningful lives. Yes, I think there are some true atheists. And by a true atheist, I mean someone who, in effect, is saying, I will live my life as if there is no God. In other words, it's pragmatic. It's a deliberate decision. I'm going to lead my life in a certain way as if there is no God. And I know some atheists like that. But many others, I think, really have a sort of belief system that there is no God, which they know they can't prove. And those tend to be the very aggressive atheists who attack religion so aggressively. Apologetics is an attempt to explain to people who are not religious believers what religion is all about, and also to take into account the difficulties that our culture has with religious belief. In other words, when people say, well, of course, I can't believe in God because of suffering or because of something like that, you try to help them to see that actually this is not as big a problem as they think. And another very important thing is that apologetics is really trying to explain what the faith is all about to people who don't really understand it. If you like, it's trying to communicate faith to our culture. And that's very important in dialoguing with atheism, because many atheists don't really understand what Christianity is all about. And therefore, it's very important for Christians to be able to explain to atheists why their faith is so important, why it's so exciting, and the difference it makes to their lives. Well, I think it can help in two ways. One of them is by reassuring a religious believer that their faith makes sense. In other words, that they believe something that is reasonable, that's exciting, that makes a difference. And you know, many religious believers don't think very much about their faith. And I think one of the things that we need to do is to help believers to realize how trustworthy and reliable their faith is. But the second thing is this. The second thing is that apologetics encourages believers to talk to those who are outside the faith. In other words, when somebody says, well, of course, I can't believe in God because it's just too difficult to believe, you don't see that as a threat, but rather you see it as an invitation to have a conversation about why anybody would believe in God and the difference that it makes. Well, the movement linked with Richard Dawkins and Christopher Hitchens is called the New Atheism. And I think what is new about this atheism is not its arguments. The arguments are very, very old. They're being recycled. What is new is the aggressiveness of this form of atheism. Older forms of atheism would say, well, there are certain difficulties in believing in God. The new atheism says, well, anybody who believes in God is a deluded fool. It's very much attacking religious people, not simply religious ideas. And the other thing that's new about the new atheism is the, if I can put it like this, the use of slogans rather than arguments. In other words, things like the God delusion or God is not great, in effect become simple slogans that are used to try and discredit religion. And that I think is really quite difficult to engage with, because these slogans are very, very short, very, very easy to remember, and very often we give longer answers which people find difficult to listen to. Well, I think the way it manifests itself is that our culture tends to be suspicious of people who are religious. They very often think that to be a religious person is to be very intolerant or to be a person who does not think. And so I think one of the things that Christians need to do is to show that they do not conform to the stereotypes that the new atheism is depicting. In other words, that if the new atheism is saying, well, religious believers don't think, we show them that religious believers do think. If they're saying that religious people are aggressive, we show that we are kind and gracious and gentle. So it's very important to understand what these new atheist stereotypes are and then begin to challenge them by showing that they just don't correspond to the reality of faith. Well, I think atheism is if you like, the worldview that gives communism its sense of direction. Because if there is no God, then the state is the ultimate authority. And so in many ways, places like, for example, Castro's Cuba would in effect adopt atheism as a way of saying there is no one, no authority, no one beyond the state who we need to recognize or accept. The state has supreme authority. So there's a very natural link between atheism and communism, in my view. Well, the reality is that there are some scientists who do believe in God, there are some scientists who don't believe in God, but the really important thing to understand is that being a scientist does not mean you have to be an atheist. Science can be interpreted very easily in a Christian way. It can also be interpreted in an atheist way. And the important point to appreciate is that science doesn't make you an atheist. It's not like that. The scientific method cannot engage the God question. And so if there are any scientists who are religious believers listening to me, I want to say that you have a very important role to play in showing that you can be a religious believer and a scientist. I used to be a scientist myself, and that's very important to help challenge this cultural stereotype, which is that science is all about atheism. Well, I really appreciate that, and it's been really nice talking to you. Thank you. It's night here. Yes. Dark. Thank you. Thank you. Bye.